And welcome to another Mark Bishop show. I have a special guest today, startup leader, cybersecurity expert, veteran, and volunteer. So, Terence, before anything else, thank you for your service. He is a certified information systems security professional. That's a CISSP, an ISC2 as well, and is currently the CEO of Dream Factory Software, an API code automation platform. Mate, right over my head. Do me a favor and explain that part of it for us, would you?
Absolutely, Mark, and thanks for having me. So you can think of Dream Factory as a way to very, very rapidly and easily put a REST API in front of any database. And a REST API is kind of think of it as like the Rosetta Stone for computer systems and languages, right? It's this sort of common agreed upon format for moving data between networks. And especially in the world of cybersecurity, it's a really important standard that we can all sort of agree upon. The way you sort of encrypt that data and authenticate it's all standardized. And so a lot of companies are looking very rapidly make sure every other data is moving via REST API, so it's easily monitored and controlled and secured.
Right. Well, we're talking cybersecurity. That's why I have you on, because it just seems to be every time we turn around, Terence, there's another hit somewhere, another hack, another this, and it's very important. I was speaking to somebody the other day. They said, look, there'll come a time where unless every site has HTTPS for starters, it won't be any good. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's if I go to a site that is not encrypted, doesn't have HTTPS today, I'm immediately quite suspicious of it. Some of these things are just kind of like the basics in order to secure, systems and websites and whatnot. And it's frankly, even when you do that stuff, it's often not enough.
So before you're doing this now, which is your baby, you start up, you ran operations at Integrate.io. You were a member of Google's offensive security, the Red Team. Okay, is that like the team at Google?
It's not necessarily the team. There's a lot of really impressive folks at Google doing some pretty cool stuff, but it's one of a handful of red teams. This one's specifically cybersecurity related. That's looking actively at what are sort of the crown jewels within Google that adversaries, often nation state sponsored attackers, might want to get access to, and how can we simulate those attacks in a way that help us defend from them down the road, right? And it also we act as sort of a sparring partner with the blue team, with detection and response, the folks who are entrusted with securing the network, right? So it's a way to do kind of active training with them in a way that they're otherwise never going to get, because Google's pretty secure, and that's a great benefit. It's a great thing, but it also means that they don't get those real life training opportunities.
Yeah, well, guys who work in the game will know what we're talking about, and this day and age, I'm heading into AI, and everything's just about online, or the shopping online, or the e-commerce and so on. It's a concern. Terence, you served in the U.S. Navy as a Naval Intelligence Officer at NCIS and Surface Warfare Officer during Operation Iraqi Freedom. I've got to know, mate, is NCIS anything like it is on TV, or is that just a lot of rubbish?
It's a lot of rubbish, unfortunately. They got some of the acronyms right. I worked at the MTAC, the Multiple Threat Alert Center, which I think technically is they have in one of the episodes. But I'll tell you real quick why NCIS is fascinating, but it isn't like the show. NCIS sits across a bunch of different and very interesting title authorities. So within the U.S. government, you can only do things if you have very specific authority to do them. Right. Title 10 is the legal authority for the Department of Defense to pursue military operations and intelligence operations in support of military operations. There's a title authority around law enforcement. There's a title authority around intelligence collection. NCIS actually fits at the cross-section of all three of those in a really interesting way. And so I've always thought, and this is just a kind of an assumption, that they picked NCIS to make that show around because it kind of fits across those really cool areas. And you can imagine with a little bit of creative thinking and imagination that you could do some pretty wild and cool stuff,
Right. Right. Well, there you go. Sometimes it's better not to know. Never mind. Terence is a certified information systems security professional, folks. That's CISSP, in case you didn't know, through ISC2. Now, he's passionate about giving back to the community through public service. I'd like to mention this. He's on the board of directors for the American Red Cross for Northern California coastal region. And he also serves on the board of advisors for Shields and Stripes, a nonprofit organization assisting veterans and first responders. Boy, do they do a good job. And this is, of course, vets with PTSD. Now, let me ask you this, Terence. How is AI, code automation, and work automation changing the nature of work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we're seeing these new LLMs, the large language models, and things like ChatGPT, really fundamentally changing the way that that software engineers
Mm-hmm.
and executives in this field are and engineers across the board are working with data and information. And what you're seeing is the ability to now, with code automation, generate code that would otherwise take maybe weeks or months. You can do it in a matter of a few hours. And Dream Factory is sitting in kind of a very specific section of that around API generation. And so, whereas you can take a screenshot of an application, just a picture, and AI can code that up. API generation kind of does that on the data side. What we can do is we take a snapshot of a data schema within a database. Think of like a massive Excel spreadsheet, and
Okay.
we can generate a REST API from that immediately. And so it's really kind of changing the game and allowing organizations to move a lot faster when it comes to modernization.
Well, I was going to ask you really because, AI seems to be able to do so much. Um, in which way is AI and work automation, changing tech companies today? There must be a heck of a shift there.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a hotly debated topic right now.
Mhm.
We're seeing tech layoffs at a time when you think, there's all this money being spent on AI,
Mhm.
and one of the assumptions is that companies like Google and like Facebook and some of these others are now realizing, hey, we can do a lot more work with a lot less engineers. And so it might be time to kind of start kind of paring down the actual total number of engineers. In
Mm.
the startup world, we're not seeing that. If anything, I'm just looking across my company and saying, look at how much more work we can do, how much more things we can complete with the current headcount we have. And my hope is that, if we can get done as that much more, it means we're able to grow that much more, which means actually I can hire more engineers and do even more work. It's almost like this exponential curve. But Mark, it's a anyone's guess. It's a hard thing to judge because there's just so many moving parts and things are moving so fast.
Mm. Well, what concerns me, of course, as a total layman, is you talked before how easy, and I've been studying AI myself with courses lately, whether it's Chat GTP, Gemini, or something else. But as an LLM, what I'm getting at is if it's so easy for us, how easy is it for all these nasties out there to get in, and hack?
Yeah. The this is sort of the one of the key questions around the ethics of AI. Of It is so much easier to make a mess of things, if you will, than it is to try and clean them up, right? And bad
Right.
actors just have the ability to have an exponentially negative effect on society, on systems, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you think companies spend decades building out a data set only to have a hacker come in an afternoon, encrypt the whole thing, and deny them access, right? Delete the whole thing, right? So
Yeah.
there's this sort of
Yeah.
asymmetry in the way cybersecurity um, is built, and it means that, yeah, I mean the ability to cause harm is really um, it's huge. It was before AI, and AI is just making it that much easier for bad actors to find that foothold and get inside networks. So
Hmm.
it's
Okay.
going to
So
be a
you
tough.
guys are conscious of it all the time in the industry. Like you're looking for ways, every day to be able to stop them.
100%. And my little kind of tiny corner of that around APIs is an important one because a lot of breaches are actually APIs being taken advantage of that just haven't been secured, right?
I
And it's
see.
because it's a lot of code work, manual code work to get an API up to up to snuff from a technology or from a security standpoint. So if you can automate that the way we do, it allows you to
Ah,
just have one less sort of open door, you know.
okay. So, folks, there you go. This is the Mark Bishop Show. And of course, my guest is the founder and CEO of Dream Factory. When I first heard the name, I thought it was going to be totally opposite to what it was with the tag, Dream Factory. But there you go. You dream it, they'll do it. A startup that's really going somewhere from an ex-vet again. And thank you for your service, Terence. It sounds like you know what the heck you're doing. How did you enter tech anyway, from the military background? With the military background.
That's a great question. I will just jump in with one sort of small note. I'm not the founder of Dream Factory. The founder stepped away a few years ago.
Oh,
You know, I'm actually kind of sensitive to that point because I think the founder experience is like a really almost it's almost like a sacred thing. I hope to found my own company someday.
all right. Well, we
I
just took that off you. Okay.
typically,
So, what do you want to be? Do you want to be
yeah,
a CEO? Is that do? Well, is that who
I
you
am
are?
the CEO. The CEO.
Ah, okay. Terrific.
But
Terence Bennett
I
is the
just clean up the
CEO of Dream Factory.
but it's a great question, right? Entering tech is difficult. It's competitive, and the fact is, a tech company is looking for very specific things, and in many cases, the military isn't going to give you those very very specific things that they're looking for, right? So you have to find what in your experience, what in your background is compelling and is what they need at that moment in time, right? And it just so happened when I was getting out in 2017, I spent a year as an executive assistant to a senior officer at the Office of Naval Intelligence. And these are really interesting roles. A senior officer will take a junior officer, bring him to the front office to kind of show them how the sausage gets made, right? To show
Mm-hmm.
them, you know, how things are getting done in the real world. And
Right.
it was it really, you know, it was a great experience for me. Little did I know it was actually going to open doors for me down the road at Google. And so my first job at Google was actually as the administrative business partner. My boss called me his mini chief of staff
Right.
for the product and database team, and it was a great kind of foot in the door and opportunity to learn the culture, learn the language, and get my start.
Yeah, because transitioning out, you've got that lingo to think about, so you wonder how it would shape up in a corporation. Do you have any recommendations for military vets? Getting out of the Navy now. Who are training but potentially looking for a career afterwards. But then again, you said they're putting off techs. I mean, where does this leave us? Where's the future? I know everybody's scared stiff with AI.
I think there's definitely going to be hiring to come, right? Interestingly enough, I think some of the layoffs are going to be strategic here or there. We don't really know big picture about where they're going, but I think there's a huge opportunity for military veterans because the experience you get as a veteran, the sort of toughness and grit that you build is going to last you a lifetime.
Hmm.
And so just a few kind of quick things. There's a bunch of resources out there around networking that I think are really valuable. And networking, quote unquote, kind of has a dirty sort of connotation, but really what it is an opportunity to talk to people and get deep insight and ask those hard questions, those kind of unique questions around the job or the industry that can help inform your decision making. So never go in asking for something, rather just go in with a natural curiosity and wanting to kind of learn.
Hmm.
Additionally, do your research, right? If you want to go work at Google, pick up one of the many books that have been written about Google, right? One of them is called How Google Works, and it was written by the CEO, Eric Schmidt, and the founders,
Right.
Larry and Sergey. And then, do your research beyond just a quick Google search, right? Like a lot of great companies out there have literally books written about them.
Hmm.
And so if you're gonna spend time going through the interview process, do that due diligence because it's kind of like a cheat code, right? Like
Right.
you
Right.
can
No,
very
fair enough.
quickly learn, what are the values? How do they communicate? There's a lot of nuance, almost subconsciously,
Yeah.
around communication within a company. You can very quickly pick that up and read the book.
It's not all about sitting around on beanbags or playing ping pong at Google. Great place to work, they tell me. In fact, why did you first join Google as an executive assistant?
When I got out, I think I wanted to sort of prove to myself I could make it on the outside, and Google just seemed like that tallest peak. That was like the Mount Everest
Yeah.
for tech, and I thought if I can make it there, if I can sort of make a home for myself and learn everything I possibly can, then I'll also have set myself up for success.
Yeah.
And
Let's face it. if you left Google down the track, you're Google trained, aren't you? And you've been with a big one to be able to go to. But it's gutsy, and I deal with entrepreneurs all day, every day, 365. So I appreciate the fact that you have now started. Well, you haven't started it, but you're the CEO of a startup, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So the challenges are there. That's the bottom line
100%.
I'm trying to get
Challenge,
to. Because this
challenge.
show is about, all sorts of people. How are APIs making data and databases more secure, though, and accessible?
So, APIs act as this sort of translation layer between the database and the application, right? So,
Is it like a firewall sort of thing?
in a way, yeah, that's a good analogy. So think of it this way, right? If there's a hack of Verizon a few years ago,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some attacker had compromised that application, that customer facing application, the part of the system that you're interacting with on the web page. And when they compromised that application, they got direct access via an API to the database. They didn't have to actually access the database directly because they had access to the API. And if the API at Verizon, for instance, had sort of industry best practice security,
Right.
they would have been able to pull out the 11 million or 40
Whatever.
million, whatever.
I like the way you put it.
Record, right?
Industry best practices. In other words, if they'd had Darn Dream Factory come in and do something, that wouldn't have happened.
Dream Factory, but I mean, these are industry best practices. These are things that have been around for, in many cases, decades. So we're not really reinventing the wheel. We're taking an accepted standard that everyone sort of has agreed upon, the REST API, and we've just made it easier to work with. We automated some of that process.
How is the API code automation changing? Best practice when accessing databases.
So the process of building, for instance, something like rate limiting. A rate limit is when it's essentially to say this API is used to handling 1,000 API calls a minute. If there's more than 1,000 API calls per minute, you're going to just cut them off. You're not going to let them go through, right?
Okay.
Something like that's actually quite technically burdensome to implement. It can be a lot of work, right? Automation tools allow you to literally do that with one click. It's a matter of seconds versus potentially hours or weeks worth of work.
Right.
So like any automation, it can actually allow organizations to transfer the cognitive load away from manual work, kind of like the horse allowing you to plow your field allows you then to plant that much more, and allows you to think more strategically perhaps around how you're going to plant because you've got that much more free time and that much more sort of flexibility, right? So allows organizations to shift priorities.
So what's the difference between no code, low code, and code automation?
Yeah, so this is a good question because no code is often synonymous with tools that are kind of simplistic, perhaps, right? That have like very specific kind of structured use cases, and there's no option for code. And low code is a little more flexible, where there's a place where you can add code and add additional functionality as necessary. And then automation is the actual ability to generate that code. So for instance, I could use a tool to do a bunch of stuff, and then if there's some specific custom code I want to add, I can actually then go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, give me a script that does X, Y, and Z, and I can then add that code in. So these are all, in many cases, tools that are kind of can be used together, right?
Okay, so how is no code changing the way enterprises are building applications then? I guess with AI, right?
Exactly, yeah. And in many cases, you've got a very specific use case that only the people within that organization are really going to understand and can build a solution around. But if those people aren't technical, it can cost a fortune to then bring in coders to do that, right? A software engineer in a simple way is actually kind of like a translator, right? It translates real world things into software, right? So if you can take the program manager or business analyst who understands this process deeply and allow them to build the tool themselves via no code tools, then you've actually cut out that middleman, and you've actually allowed the organization to move much faster.
Well, it's all as clear as mud to me, mate, I can tell you.
I'm glad.
When researching this one, I tell you, I was exploding. Never mind. But you learn with asking questions. Okay, we're getting close to a close. So I've got to ask you, what trends do you see in cybersecurity, pen testing, and offensive security?
I think we're going to start to see this market move a lot faster. If it's not already moving fast enough, it's going to start moving even faster because AI and these tools, right? So back to this idea of like an LLM, large language model. A large language model is really good with language. Software is language. So these tools are almost purpose built to be good at peeling apart and tearing apart software and finding bugs. And so when AI starts to get really good at finding vulnerabilities and bugs in software, you're going to start to see the process, that kind of feedback loop around software and vulnerability start to move incredibly fast. And you're going to have AI on both sides, both patching software as fast as the bad guys are finding those vulnerabilities and trying to take advantage of them.
Hmm. How about that? See, I hope you've learned something today, viewers. I really do. Those of you in the industry and those of you out of it. Dreamfactory.com. To get there is HTTP, of course. Go through dreamfactory.com. Interesting site, a lot to learn there. You'll get them on also on LinkedIn, of course. And Terence himself, he's been on many different podcasts. Fine Flow, ASM Connected, Drive On podcast, No Code Wealth. They can be found at your favorites. The website, as I've said, is dreamfactory.com. And the LinkedIn is linkedin.com/in/Terence Bennett. You know, my family's name in Australia was Bennett, of all things. What a connection there. But they came from England originally and ended up in Australia. So.
I have a relative in Perth.
Oh, you
Of the
do?
Bennett
Ah,
clan, yeah.
nice city. Nice city. I'm from Melbourne originally, my hometown. But of course, the Westerners don't like the Easterners. Wise men from the East, you know? Like a Canada America thing, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Actually,
that's nice.
I've got some good friends in Melbourne. My brother-in-law went to I think Monash. Is that
Monash University, yeah.
it's Melbourne, right?
Monash Uni. Yeah, it's a great country. Been here a while now, but yeah, you know, I feel like I was born 20 years too late, you know, with all this stuff. And but I'm even the AI, you know, it's just seems lazy in some ways, you know, Terence. It's like I'm not earning it. I mean, if you just, you know, but then again, you've still got to give the correct prompts. You've still got to be able to do, and Chat GTP isn't the end all and be all. I've learned that. And we do a lot of creative stuff. So consequently, you know, you've got to be sure what you're doing there. But listen, is there anything you'd like to close with and share with anybody?
Um, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be on here, and please reach out. I'm always happy to chat with folks in industry and hear your experience. Any veterans out there looking for a hand, looking for someone to ask some questions up. Happy to have those conversations.
Okay. Well, is there an email for you directly or a phone number
Yep.
they can get you on?
LinkedIn's actually best.
The LinkedIn is the best. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've noticed this is interesting. I've noticed a lot of companies are going towards, unfortunately, where you can't get a hold of them. What I mean by that is there's no normal direct phone call into a receptionist, you know, that in turn will put you through. And I was speaking with somebody the other day, Terence, and they said, you know, I'm up to here with this automation business, not being able to get anybody live. And it just seems to be proliferating right through all business. And then it goes into the six messages, you know, and you get the whole lot first about the company before it'll get to, or we'll call you back maybe. And you could be busy, you could be out doing something, and then you miss the call. But I don't know if there's a new way that can get into companies and still get well of doing the chat, of course, online. That's the only other way. The bots, right?
yep, yeah.
But you know, you can pick a bot.
It's sort of like the cybersecurity thing, right? The email automation and the spam calling is kind of ruining communication because like I have an 11-person company. I have to constantly protect them from just nonstop spending their time dealing with bots, fake bots, calling bots, email bots, right? I get hundreds of emails a day. I have like all
Yeah,
these
so do I. 400,
tools
in fact.
to try and just like filter through this and find it. That's why I actually recommend LinkedIn. LinkedIn's not great, but at least there's less of this like automated garbage. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
it's sort of
yeah.
like this arms race, right? Like companies are trying to figure out how can they keep their people focused on the things that matter and not just wasting time.
Well, that's it. And that is exactly right, because I try to go through and find out what I've been waiting on for some answers. Because in this game, you book ahead, of course, and I've got people all over the place, and you're trying to get hold of them, and they got a life. But by the time I get through the 400, it's dinner time, I've got nothing else done. And that's no good. I needed something or other that'll filter for me, and that's it. It just knows, hey, well, there's only 6 I've got to work with. Fantastic. Anyway, interesting speaking with you, Terence. I have an idea. I might call you up on it, actually, if I may. But through LinkedIn. Terence Bennett is the gentleman in this particular episode. He is the CEO of a company called Dream Factory. They're specialists in what they do, high-tech stuff. Cybersecurity would be probably the best word to be able to utilize to describe them. And there's a lot more. So you can talk to them, figure out maybe it's not for you with their company, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you don't know till you ask. And he's offered to do that, haven't you, Terence?
Absolutely. Yeah. Please reach out.
That's fantastic. So thanks, mate. Appreciate you being on the Mark Bishop Show. And good luck with your company.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
So I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you soon for another.
Yeah, apologies again about being late.